I'd like to formally welcome everybody to the Brown Bag Lunch and Learn. My name is Mike Hughes. Most of you know me, those of you in the room and those of you on internet land watching the stream. I'm really excited about today's event. First of all, this is the first Brown Bag Lunch and Learn that we've had since I've been here in the boardroom auditorium. So this is a special day. Another thing, this is also the first Brown Bag. We've had several events over the last couple of years where we've had a panel of experts. So you guys are really in for a treat tonight. So we're going to have the chairman speak in just a minute. He's going to give a brief words. Chris O'Neill, as you know, is our chief of the Media Relations Division, is going to do formal introductions and introduce the panel themselves, but we're really excited to have you here. Thank you for supporting this. As you know, Brown Bags are part of the suite of activities that come from the chairman's office that give you an opportunity to engage with leadership, or in this case, people outside the agency, to talk with each other, and in this case today, to eat, which is always a good thing. All right, so thank you for being here. Thank you guys for being there online. I'll give it to the chairman and he'll say a few brief words.
Thank you, Mike. Always appreciate you arranging the brown bags. I know it really is a lot of work, and thank our panelists and Chris for putting this on. So as you know, we've started these about 2 years ago so that people can get an insight into the various other operations of the NTSB. We started out talking about accident investigation, and then we've had things on like the federal budgeting process. Now we're hearing from our communications folks. I do know, because I know these people, this will be a heart-stopping discussion.
Oh my God.
So.
All right, way to manage expectations, sir.
Who in here is CPR trained? Let's see. One. Okay, we're going to have CPR training on the 18th. Paul and Sharon and I and a few others did CPR training last week. So we will have CPR training. Where's the nearest AED? Nick, where is it? Lobby. Where exactly in the lobby? Exactly right, between the two exit doors. That's exactly right. And if you need to call security, what number would you dial? What is it? I heard it, but it wasn't. 6262, that's right. So we always want to think about safety. This way here, the exits, they're not really exits. They will get you out of the building, but they're going to take you into hallways. So if the building's on fire, you may not want to go that way. If you want to get out of the building, go that way. Safety is in our name. Let's always think about it. Okay, well, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this Lunch and Learn. We kind of set up this format a little differently than the others because I figured rather than hear about how media relations works for the NTSB from me, you could get a much more dynamic and a much more broad and open picture from the people who cover us for a living. So today we have with us Brianna Gurciullo. I worked on it, I really did. She's from Politco. And she has roughly 6 years as a journalist, spread through some internships and times at Politco and others. Also with us today, we have David Shepardson, has about 25 years as a journalist, currently with Reuters. And then we have Tom Costello, roughly 30 years as a journalist. Yeah, I've got 30 as a communicator, so it's okay. It's all right. There's a lot that comes with that experience. Currently with NBC. All of these folks are what we call beat reporters. Back in the day, I think the lines are getting more blurred in today's environment, but back in the day, there were journalists who specialized in what they called a beat. Transportation beat, sometimes it was agency specific. These folks cover most everything that's newsworthy about the NTSB, and I think they're really well positioned to help you understand what makes news, what doesn't make news, what are the challenges in today's digital information environment, what the NTSB is doing well, and what we can improve on. So with that, I thought we'd just go ahead and jump right into it. I thought what would be helpful for folks is, we see you when we have a board meeting, if we're at an accident site, we're releasing a report, a most wanted list event kickoff, but I don't think people have an appreciation for what your day is really like. I wonder if you can maybe concisely kind of tell us what is a typical day like for you all in doing your job.
I'll start, and I'll throw in a plug for you guys. So my day usually starts by walking my kids to school. My 7-year-old just started 2nd grade, and I have a 4-year-old who's going to start pre-K on Friday. And one of the things I'm constantly telling my kids, and maybe it's from attending and covering so many of your events, is how important safety is at all times. I mean, living in DC in a busy neighborhood, I think it's this constant reminder of, making sure that cars see you, you make eye contact as you get to crosswalks. And I just want to say, I think about your mission, like you guys are this agency which your only obligation is to try to improve safety. You're not promoting anybody or not, I think as reporters, we cover this, your agency, thinking about how, every day, we're all using various modes of transit. So maybe I'm walking the kids to school, maybe there's a text alert from Eric or somebody about an NTSB investigation. If it's really important, I might have to pull up my computer, stop wherever I am and write something. I think maybe it's late at night through data miner or something else coming on Twitter or email. And I think the most important thing to think about our jobs is that given transportation accidents, crashes, and so on happen at all times, and there's updates, that our workload is not 9 to 5, 7 to 7. I mean, so things happen in real time. It might be the Tempe Police Department putting out the Uber self-driving car crash report at 11 o'clock at night. It might be an update on Lion Air or something from Boeing very early or very late. So it's really unpredictable. And I think as we continue to talk, the key thing is that we're bombarded every day by possible stories, right? We have to make judgments. What's important enough to write about, because there's so much noise, there's so many accidents. I mean, just today, I think you guys have put out at least a couple of preliminary reports on some smaller crashes. But we're reading all those reports, we're looking at everything. We're deciding what stories to cover on a spot basis, and then looking for trends, right? What are the things that we should step back and do a bigger story? But obviously, the bigger lens is that the largest accidents, or the ones that have garnered the most attention, really capture a lot of our time, be it Boeing or Southwest or Uber or Tesla or whatever. Those are the ones that either for investors, the public, or for the broader public interest questions, garner the most attention. Kind of like car crashes, the things that happen every day just don't get as much attention.
Yeah, press your mic.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks. Good.
Okay, should be red. All right, not green. I think a lot of what David says applies to NBC News, but he has the luxury of being able to report on a lot more incremental stories than I do as working for a national broadcaster, not narrowcaster. So what that means is literally, we are on your NBC station across the country. If we were narrowcasting, we would be the Golf Channel. Right? We would be specifically doing something for only golf. I used to work at CNBC. At CNBC, you're only doing business and economics, so that's the difference. A typical day for me, I start my day at 6:30 in the morning. I'm doing the Today Show in the 7 o'clock hour usually. Not every day, kind of depends on what's going on. Thankfully for me, I don't only cover transportation issues. I also cover cybersecurity, I cover business and economics, and then I can cover something crazy and silly. Like, they had me yesterday doing a silly story about how universities are packed, and as a result, colleges are putting kids in hotels. So that's a quick one-off. It's not the core of our beat, but it keeps me sane. You do the Today Show at 7:30, 8, depending on the story. The harder news stories go earlier in the newscast. The lighter stories go later and later and later. And at 8:15 in the morning, you're doing the, universities, they're overcrowded. And then, I'm also spending my day reading in, as these guys are as well. I'm reading what they write as well. Did I miss something? Because very often they're able to really report on the minutia of you guys, what you're doing every day, and I don't have that luxury. And so I'm very often reading to see, all right, what is David saying this morning, or Alan Levin at Bloomberg, or whomever, and what do I need to be aware of that maybe I missed? Talking to whomever, Eric or anybody at your organization, Chris. And then in addition, just being aware of, okay, right now the major stories on my docket are going to be Boeing and the 737 MAX and the FAA and the new administrator. And those are the major ongoing stories that we try to stay up on. And we may or may not decide that there's something that we need to report on for NBC Nightly News. So my morning starts with the Today Show. I may do something during the day for MSNBC or CNBC, but right now it's all politics all the time, and thank God I don't cover the White House. So I'm able to really just kind of focus on my beats. And then if we have something we're going to do for NBC Nightly News, we spend our day dedicated to that. So for example, yesterday I spent my day dedicated to ransomware attacks. They're growing and exploding across the country, and we did that for Nightly News last night. And I'm usually multitasking. While I'm doing that, I'm also now getting ready for today's show, wants something completely different in the morning, so I'm trying to juggle multiple interviews and writing multiple stories and getting all of that ready. So every day is different, which is for me, that's the nice thing of the job. Every day is different. If you have ADHD, it's a perfect job for you. But, you can't lose sight of the beats. And for us, the beats are, for me at NBC News, from my producer and I, and I've been on this beat now for 14 years. He's been on it for about 25 years. So, we know a lot of folks, and we usually have a pretty good sense of what's going on every day and whether something's going to rise to the level of a national news story.
I think, what was that term you used? Narrowcast? I think Politico Pro would be the narrowcasters. We really dive deep into policy. So at Politico Pro, we have a team of 5 who cover transportation issues, an editor, someone who covers surface transportation, someone who covers transportation security, a newsletter writer, Morning Transportation, subscribe, and I cover aviation mostly. So typical day for me, usually I wake up in the morning, first thing I check is email and Twitter, and see how my day is going to go, because that usually dictates it. Usually, obviously it's August recess, but usually I go up to Capitol Hill and work from there, cover hearings, cover the House and Senate floor, keep track of the vote schedules, and I try to talk to members of Congress for the relevant committees of jurisdiction about bills they're working on, oversight they're doing, and then other than that, we cover specifically DOT and NTSB. So we are the narrowest probably of everyone at this table.
Awesome, thank you. So that's a really good insight. I heard a lot of terms in there that kind of lead me to a next question that I think would be really helpful to discuss. So there's a lot of noise, you alluded to it, you're bombarded by information, right? The digital information space makes it so easy for everybody to share everything, but I wondered if you could, we talked about data miner, you talked about checking email, you talked about checking Twitter. One of the things we always talk about in communication is know your audience, right? Who are we communicating to? Why are we communicating with them? And how do they prefer to consume information? I would love to hear from you as reporters working with the government agencies. What is your preference in receiving information for story ideas or information about newsworthy items? Anybody can start off.
So I'll say I think the NTSB does a great job, tweeting things out immediately. Because nowadays, I'm sure all you guys have the NTSB newsroom on a mobile alert. That's why we all have our phones sitting here in case, because that's the fastest way to get things out. And, the demand and our time to get things out quickly is really changed, right? We're all wire services now. We all want to get things on the wire or on the websites as quickly as possible. So that's great, and I think you should still keep emailing news releases out. When we were talking earlier before this event, the only thing that would be, and I don't know technically if it's feasible, but if there's a way for reporters to get some sort of notification when the NTSB creates a new docket. So because before you move to the hearing stage, you open a docket, and sometimes there's a lag between the time the agency discloses when that docket is being created to when it actually shows up on the website. And I don't know if it's possible long-term, because we have the accident number, if it's possible for us to sign up to get some sort of alert for when that docket gets created. I mean, usually it's not a problem, but there have been a couple occasions where somebody stumbled onto a docket earlier in a high-profile incident. So anyway, that's something to think about. But generally speaking, we get quick notifications of new activities from you guys.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I still like the emails because I look to them sometimes for a little more, usually they're deep, they have a little more information, a little deeper than a tweet, although I realize you often tweet the link out to that news release. I agree, and listen, I wouldn't say this to every government agency. I think you guys do a very good job of communicating. I think that your YouTube channel is terrific. I think your tweets, your updates, I think it's very useful. Now, keep in mind, I am very much video dependent, right? If I don't have photos or video of whatever's happening, it becomes a newspaper story. So I've got to, whether it's social media, these days there's always video and there's always a photograph. So social media is going to feed us, but we appreciate the fact that on the scene of something terrible, you will very often have taken your own photographs and your own video that we can rely on. We know that we can depend on the veracity of that photograph and that video. So whether it's the chopper that crashed on top of the roof in New York City, whether it's the Philadelphia Southwest incident in which the lady was sucked out of the window, those authoritative and dependable pieces of video and photographs are critical. Let me just say, and we said this on the phone when we were talking with Chris, one of the reasons the NTSB has a sterling reputation is because you're transparent. Because you don't try to shade the news, you don't try to hide anything. And the minute if that were to ever happen, you undermine your credibility. But you guys know that, and that's why you have such a reputation. And so I would only say that I would encourage you just to make sure that everybody in your organization has bought into that. Because if anybody thinks that it's to your advantage to hide anything or to be less than transparent, it just undermines everything of the credibility of the organization. And then we start to doubt, well, can we trust that photograph? Can we trust that piece of video? Can we trust that interview? And we don't, God, I would hate to see that happen. We really appreciate the mission of the NTSB and your transparency and how you are forthright and honest and you don't shade anything. So we're very, very grateful for that.
So I guess just to add on what's already been said, same here where I get a lot of my information from Twitter, also traditional email, press releases. Those are the two things I always have open on my phone or on my laptop computer is email and Twitter. And also setting alerts for certain accounts like NTSB Newsroom so that the moment that it's tweeted, it pops up on my phone. One thing that is a little difficult when it comes to covering NTSB investigations is when an accident occurs and it's not within driving distance of Washington, D.C. We don't have the resources to fly out to the site and cover the initial media briefings. And it is usually local news stations will video the news conferences and post them on their websites. Sometimes the streams aren't always reliable, sometimes they cut out, sometimes they don't go up at all and we'll miss them completely. So that's just one difficulty that we face as an organization that can't travel across the country for the different accidents.
Chris, you might want to mention that we now have the live streaming capability. I believe that's the case.
Yeah, I know we're building out our live streaming capability. James is hard at work. It's always a challenge having the bandwidth when we're in some of our remote locations, but it is absolutely something we want to bring to the scene for just that purpose, recognizing, we even see it, we were talking before we got started this morning, even here at the NTSB boardroom, when we have a board meeting, you see fewer and fewer journalists physically present because we're able to webcast, and it's just like everybody else. It's time intensive, juggling multiple stories, juggling time, you have to kind of...
Can I speak to that, by the way?
Yeah, please.
I just want you to know that he's right. You won't see me coming to NTSB board meetings a lot anymore. Now, you used to see me here all the time, but thank God for your streaming. But here's the reason. we are, at least I am, drinking out of a fire hose every day. I mean, I am juggling multiple stories. Some of them never make air. You'll never know that they were something that were on my docket. They're not going to be on NBC News tonight. But I don't know that when I go into it. And you spend your day, maybe you're dealing with two things that could make air tonight, and you've got something for the Today Show, and you're trying to put out a fire because there's an emergency landing somewhere that everybody's concerned about. So to sit in this boardroom becomes problematic. Thank God for your new Wi-Fi, by the way. But that's why. So don't take that as a reflection of lack of interest. Not at all. We're taking advantage of your technology, and we're watching it while we're also, doing everything else.
No, just to quickly add, Tom's absolutely right. I mean, so many of the stories we pursue, we ultimately don't write about or become much less. The airplane on a Friday night that overran the runway at Jacksonville. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many people got woken up at Reuters around the country to prepare for that, thinking the worst, right? So ultimately, thank goodness it was just a very minor incident when nobody was hurt. And I also cover the FCC, I cover some tech issues, so like Tom, where I'm also juggling a bunch of different things, and that's because a lot of the reporting, we either have the narrow world, right? We have Brianna, there are a lot of other outlets that cover very intensely, a lot of trade press, and then like the number of beat reporters just covering aviation has shrunk from mainstream outlets. So again, it's worth noting that we're reading everything you guys are doing, but just not all of it is going to wind up on the wire.
Thank you for that. Real quick, wanted to mention at the start of this, we are going to save some time for Q&A at the end, so if you have some questions, keep them in mind. We'll bring you up to one of the mics so you can ask it so folks that are in the webcast can hear. And folks who are watching this via the webcast, if you have a question, like to have it answered here by our panelists, please submit your question to Mike Hughes, and he'll bring it over to me, and we'll get it on the webcast for you. So, you kind of touched on this a little bit in the last answer, and I want to kind of pull that thread a little bit. So projects here can be kind of long, right? From, once we're done with the on-scene phase in an investigation, depending on how major that investigation is, how complex it is, some things take literally years to bring to fruition. Certain safety studies, people work on these projects for years. Getting ready for the Most Wanted List campaign is about an 8-month process before we ever kick it off. And so when people are finished with these, they're rightfully proud of that work, and they're excited to communicate about it. And they're often perplexed why some of those things don't make headlines. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about newsworthiness, or what is it about NTSB that makes news, and what is it about NTSB that becomes challenging to make news from your perspective?
Well, first of all, it's important to point out that different news organizations are going to cover NTSB differently. We aren't going to write the same story necessarily. We might. So I would say, of course, we're going to cover the initial information about an accident, and then we'll cover anything that the NTSB does related to that accident, preliminary reports, hearings, and then the final report. For things, could you give me examples of what you mean? Are you talking about like the most wanted list and things like that? Why those don't necessarily get?
Yeah, I think you could take a sampling from across the board. Maybe sometimes safety alerts. We have kind of high expectations for them, and they don't get the traction we hope they would. The most wanted list gets a lot of earned media attention, but it sometimes becomes challenging, I think, to break squelch with some of the individual items on that list. I think, shameless promotion. You were walking away with something from us today. But yeah, and then sometimes there are certain safety studies that are, I think, very complex, very dense in the science, right, and very specific to a specific topic of transportation, to a particular mode, to a particular facet of it, that are truly helpful in terms of transportation safety, but maybe don't apply to a larger audience. And so we're always perplexed why it doesn't happen, and is it just the nature of the beast, or are we missing the mark somewhere?
I think, so from Politico's perspective, let's say a study came out tomorrow about automation in aviation. We would absolutely write about that because it's an important issue right now in light of the 737 MAX accidents. So we kind of keep in mind trends. We keep in mind what is most present in the public's mind right now. For Politico, what is most present in lawmakers' minds? What is the FAA working on? So, yeah, does that make sense? It kind of, what fits into a trend or what fits into a story we've been covering continuously? Something like the most wanted list, luckily for Politico, we have newsletters, and we can fit things like that, studies, safety alerts, and things like that in our newsletter. It might not get the full treatment of a story, but we at least try to mention it because we know our readers care about those things and want to at least be informed and can click on a link and read it for themselves.
I was just going to say, sorry. If you have the ability to give us things under an embargoed basis, I mean, I think back to when the chairman, before you were chairman, you did an embargoed briefing that I attended on the NTSB's recommendation on .05. And I forget how much notice we had. Maybe we had a day or something. But when reporters, given all the things we're juggling, if you have a safety alert or something that you're able to explain the details ahead of time, I think there's a better chance of getting coverage. Just because when something gets thrown out there as a press release, if it's not a breaking news, we're juggling a bunch of different things. I think the one thing you guys do that I'm not able to cover as much, and I know Tom might feel the same way, is you've done a lot of day-long, 2-day sessions on various big issues like school bus safety or distraction or alcohol or speeding. And I might watch part of those on the webcast, but we don't have as much time, given all the things we have going to cover all those sessions that are super newsworthy and valuable, but often that stuff gets used, I think, for background for other stories rather than covering them on a spot basis.
Could one of you real quick, for those who might not be familiar, explain what an embargo is and how it works?
Yeah, so an embargo is, I'm dealing with one right now. An embargo is an organization, and the one that I'm dealing with, it's AAA, coming out tomorrow morning with a major new study about a safety risk involving automobiles. And they give us that report a couple of days in advance. And that allows us to go, especially in TV, it allows me to go shoot the story. In other words, in order to tell the story on TV, I need to have characters, I need to have some examples, I need to interview, you name it, an ER doctor, the author of the study, a fire department battalion chief, you name it, so that we can put a story together for TV. It's hard to turn that, very quickly. So if it's an embargoed release, they say you can have this information now, but you can't report it until, in this case, it's midnight 01 tomorrow morning. That gives me the time to go out and start building the story. And we all deal with embargoes, and it's a trust. We have developed a relationship with these organizations, and that we're going to be true to our word, and we're not going to break the embargo. And you have to trust that reporter and that organization. There are some organizations that blatantly will break an embargo, and we all shake our heads and think you just ruined it for everybody. Why do that? So, but also it also undermines your relationship with them in the future. But, this really gets to the idea of narrowcasting versus broadcasting. Why do we at NBC News not report on your 10 most wanted list? Well, it's hard to even describe the volume of news coming at us these days. And I mean this sincerely. It's changed so much in the last few years. It is drinking out of a fire hose every minute of the day. And so what is going to rise to the level? Well, we need a peg, literally. We need something that we can peg this to. So if there is, God forbid tonight, another pipeline explosion, okay, I can mention now that pipeline safety was in your 10 most wanted list, or you name it, marine safety, whatever the case may be. But for us to just spend 2 minutes of NBC Nightly News talking about the 10 most wanted list becomes problematic, and it's just simply, it's going to compete with everything else going on in the world, and it's tough. Can I also say, I have thought this for 15 years. I think that is a bad name. 10 most wanted list, because it immediately implies, you know, you're looking for somebody. I think it should be the top 10 immediate safety recommendations or urgent safety I mean, you need to put urgent and safety in there, I think, because the most wanted list to me is a misnomer. And when I report that this item is on the most wanted list, I don't even say most wanted list, or I'm unlikely to say it on NBC News because it's going to confuse my audience. And I don't have the time to explain, okay, the 10 most wanted list is yada, 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 right? I need it to be a quick and impactful sentence of what is it what you as an organization want. And I may be in the minority, but I think it's a bad name. I've thought that since I started covering this beat.
You know, we have a quarterly communicators breakfast where we get together with communicators from other advocacy groups and we kind of talk about, you know, items of mutual interest. And there was a gentleman representing one of the pipeline agencies who had that very exact same thought about it. He says, you make this sound like it's something awful, and I really don't want to be on your wanted list. And I can appreciate that, yes, but, you know, you're working with us, are you not? But no, good points there. And you know, that kind of brings me to you kind of touched on it already, but I kind of like to pull it a little bit more. One of the things we're really dedicated to, it's in our core values here, is the pursuit of excellence. And I apply that to our job in media relations, right? We advance transportation safety through excellence in communication. And the only way you can do that is by getting good feedback and constantly striving to learn more, do better, improve processes, and fix the things that we're not getting right. So thank you for the props on being transparent and being timely. I would tell you I'm always trying to push everybody a little bit faster. It's always that built-in tension, that need for speed, particularly in today's digital information environment, and the need to preserve the investigative process, the integrity of the investigation. But for the things that we do well, and you already kind of hit on it, would there be an automatic wave to get notices for dockets? Can we automate perhaps when prelims hit in the aviation database or other prelim reports? But what are the things that you think NTSB could do that could make us more effective in this information space?
Well, I would just say I'm really very happy for the most part. I really mean that. I think you guys you kind of set the gold standard, I think, for government agencies. For us, I have a deadline to get it on NBC Nightly News tonight, and my competitors at ABC and CBS are going to have the same deadline. So the earlier that I can get video and photos, and you know that's what we live and breathe by, the better. So sometimes and also the late news conference at an event. A 5 o'clock news conference really puts me in a bind. I mean, because you start at 5, you don't end until 5:30, 5:40. I have to get that into a report that they are editing right this very minute, and I have to be live at 6:30. I know that sounds strange. National news goes up at 6:30 on the East Coast. Because of some strange quirk, we are on at 7 in Washington. But that's because it's a tape replay. I am on at 6:30 along almost the entire East Coast except DC. So that means I really need that news conference a lot earlier than 5 o'clock, and I certainly need the video and photos earlier than 5. Every half an hour increment, you can push it back, and we're always telling Eric, can you do it just a little bit earlier? Can you make it 3:30? Can you, because it really, 5 o'clock. So I would just ask if it's possible, and I know it's not always, but if it's possible to just offer what you can a little bit earlier, that would be helpful. And, the interview with the on-site board member or even an on-site commander, I would say that during the helicopter crash in New York, you guys had an aviation safety investigator on the scene, crash investigator. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He was excellent. He was outstanding. He was no BS. He was just standing on a street corner with his NTSB jacket, giving us the straight scoop. He was great. And sometimes, I got to tell you, I'd rather hear from that guy than a board member. No offense, Robert. Love you. But, this guy knew his stuff, and the authenticity really came out.
I agree. I mean, I know you don't always know, but I think one of the key challenges for us is then after the initial on-scene work, when is the preliminary report going to come out? And I know that's always, obviously we talk to the people in the communication shop, but as much guidance as we can get for when this might come out. I mean, there was one time I was in my daughter's nursery school classroom, and I think one of the Uber reports came out, and so I was sitting at a little desk, typing away at 9 a.m. But that's probably the biggest challenge is we're trying to figure out the cadence of when all these reports and investigations and board meetings are going to come out, and but that otherwise, like I said, you guys are very responsive. I mean, if we have questions after deadline, after business hours, you guys are quick to respond to us. So no, like Tom said, I think you guys are very, very responsive.
I guess that goes back to embargoes, if possible, or if that is not possible, giving us the actual report ahead of time, just giving us a heads up, just saying, this isn't reportable, just for your planning purposes, we're going to release the report in a couple hours, or something like that. That is always, sure, even if you can give like a little excerpts or something like that, something just so that we're ready, we can plan for it, we can tell our editors, just so you know, in a couple hours this is going to come out, I can't cover this other thing this other thing I was planning to cover. That's really, really helpful.
Just briefly, I think the agency does a good job of treating all reporters fairly, and this is not a knock on you guys, but the few times where we've had to kind of chase what you'd call a leak is often when you brief Congress about something. So something to keep in mind that I remember, it might have been the New Jersey transit crash where like there was a briefing to New Jersey members of Congress, and within a couple hours it got out, and so we were chasing that. So something to keep in mind, like if you're going to brief Congress, you might be prepared for it to quickly get out.
Nice segue, because I was formulating a question in my mind about leaks, and I think there's a perception, at least in the world of government communications, that there's an increased willingness to accept the unnamed source who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to speak on the matter. So we here at the NTSB, in our media relations policy, says we make all statements on the record. That doesn't mean we can't do background, right? But we don't make off-the-record comments. You don't get a statement without attribution. I wonder if you could talk about the balance between the need to be the fourth estate and the need to have that attribution, and how you work that balance.
Well, I do appreciate that statements are attributed to a name for NTSB. Other agencies don't do that. They'll just say, attribute to a agency spokesperson or an agency statement. I think it's a bit more attribute. Do you know that's it, when there's an actual name on it. For anonymous sources, there's a process at Politco, and I'm sure at other news organizations, for using anonymous sources. It has to go through layers of review, essentially. People have to approve it, not just the reporter, but people above them, and sometimes even above that editor, depending on the nature of the story, the information, how many sources you have, too. Politico very rarely, at least on our team, will report a story based on one anonymous source. It will try to at least get 2 or 3, if not more, before we report information, and we always go to the agency or the lawmaker or whatever it is, saying, just so you know, we are going to report this. If it is wrong, please tell us. So there is a process. It's not just, we get a tip from someone anonymously and then we publish it. There's layers of review and editing and double checking and going back and making sure that what we're publishing is true before we do it.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. We're not the guy sitting in his mother's basement blogging. We are, at NBC News, every single script, every single sentence goes through NBC News legal and standards. In addition to the senior producers and the executive producer of the show looking at the script. So first of all, I have to be comfortable with what I'm reporting and who my sources are. Almost always I name sources. Only rarely do I not, and I have to be really comfortable that the source knows what he or she is talking about. And then I've got to convince NBC News legal and standards attorneys up in New York that we're not going to get sued, that we are dead on the money on this. So, there is a very structured and detailed layer of scrutiny that goes through anything that we report. I teach some classes at NBC, and I make the point, we are about authenticity and transparency, just like you are. And one word I hate is when and you're going to hear it all the time, we hear it all the time, officials say. And I always think, wait a minute, who is the official? You know, if you can't name a name, then you should be able to say, you know, fire chiefs say, or homicide investigators say, or whatever the water department says. But just to throw it up as officials lacks transparency, and we should be all about transparency to our audience because we live in a democracy and they need the information to make educated decisions. So we try to live by that edict, and but there are times when you can't name somebody, so we had better be sure that we're comfortable with what we're saying.
I couldn't agree more with both my colleagues. I mean, what my editors say, what I always believe is no one's going to remember the 100 stories that you broke ahead of time, but they're sure going to remember the one story you got wrong. So when we use anonymous sources, you know, we are extremely careful, extremely reluctant, and I am, and there's always a lot of anxiousness, like, does the source have an axe to grind? Is there a reason, you know, why are they talking to us? It's not just because they feel like talking. And I think about a couple examples without mentioning the specific companies, but there have been a couple stories where I've had to chase where the board had a meeting the next day and there was another outlet that had what they said were details of the findings that are going to be released the next day. And you know, when we're in the position chasing this story, and the NTSB says, well, we can't talk about it before. I remember talking to Eric about this, about one high-profile incident a couple years ago, and generally those leaks come from somebody with a vested interest. Like there's a reason that an entity under investigation from the board wants to get certain details out ahead of time, and so that's probably the hardest part when when we're chasing something another outlet has. What's right, what's wrong, because the editors are saying, well, where is it? Is this right? And this is affecting the stock. this company's stock is going up or down based on this other story. So that's a challenge for us, but it's never, there's no reporter who expects to keep their job has any incentive to make up a source because that person's not going to be in the business very long.
I appreciate that. I forget who said it on the panel. Someone said we're all wire services now, and that really struck me. There was a job I interviewed for. I was a Commandant's press secretary when I was still active duty, and as part of the interview process, the chief of staff asked me to give him one word to describe my philosophy on crisis communication. And I laughed, and he says, "No, I'm serious." I said, "Well, I can't give you one word. I will give you two, and you will have to accept my answer or not." I said, "Okay, go ahead." And I said, "It's speed and accuracy. And they're two sides of the same coin. So in crisis communications, it does you no good to be super, super fast and have absolutely no facts. Conversely, it does you no good to be 100% accurate. I've got everything, I know everything, because you will never meet the timeliness mark. It will take you forever to get that 100% certainty. And so you have to work within that slim line between those two words to accept a little ambiguity, leave yourself space to correct it later as you get better information." But I wonder, in the digital information space, when we teach our media relations course at the training center to industry, we talk about the example of how much the information environment's changed. You go back to Miracle on the Hudson, right? And we always use the example. How long did it take for that photo to hit the Twitterverse? It was in 2009, right? It took like 38 minutes, was that right? Yep. Move forward to Asiana, and it took 38 seconds for that first photo to hit the Twitterverse. And I'm still amazed that people have the presence of mind as they run away from the burning aircraft to take a selfie. Hey, wow, bizarre. I don't get how that becomes normal, but that's what happens. So that instant information has really transformed that coin, those two sides of the equation. How does that affect your world of work?
Yeah, listen, we know that you're not going to be able to give us the result. You're not going to be able to tell us the first day of a crash or an incident what happened. I mean, you can give us some ideas. You can give us some. You can be transparent and say that we know that the plane came in at I don't know. I'm probably not even giving a good example here. We know that you cannot jump to conclusions and draw a definitive conclusion at the scene of an accident, and we know that this is going to take a couple of years, or 18 months, or whatever. However, Robert is going to be asked every single time what caused this crash. And part of it's usually not going to be one of us who's asking it. It's usually a local TV reporter or a local newspaper reporter who doesn't cover this, and they think, well, the NTSB is here; they know what's going on. You know, and you always have to repeat, this is a process. We will give you incremental information as we have it, but we can't draw conclusions yet. So we understand that. However, it's also true that we live in a 24/7, 365 microsecond news environment now, in which people want to know right this very second, what do you know as of this second? And so we have to feed that beast to some extent. We have to, you know, we can't wait until the results are in to say that a plane crashed on a Hudson. So we've got to be able to provide the information as we have it right now. Well, you know, he told ATC that he had hit a flock of birds, and we know that he told other pilots that he was going to go into the Hudson, and you know, we provide the incremental information we have, and we understand that the conclusion will take some time. Final conclusion.
I was just going to say, one of the hardest things personally I find is that when we get that report, right, and it's like the clock is ticking, I have to write something within, if it's really important, 5 to 10 minutes. I've got to read this and decide what's the most important part of this. Is it actually new? And then, of course, some of these reports are written in fairly technical language. What do the editors want to do as soon as I send over something technical? Let's rewrite this. Well, half the time the editors are going to rewrite it. They're going to insert some sort of mistake in trying to make it simpler. So that's a real challenge for us to try to turn technical language into something digestible for reporters and or for our readers, and even can be simple as like, you know, how many seconds, you know, was the 5 seconds before the actual crash? Was it before the last data from the recorder? I mean, so that's the challenge we have, is trying, you know, I mean, and of course you're not going to signpost what's the most important thing. You just throw it out there, and did we find the right thing? And so if anything, from covering many of these, I've told the editors, like, let's be more cautious, you know, let's, you know, not assume what we think we know what this means, at least for the first version. And so I think that's kind of a key thing, is, you know, more caution, you know, on all of our parts as we try to, you know, interpret these findings in in a very short time frame.
I would also just say, when covering breaking news, the challenge is the information can change. The data could have been wrong. And something that I often keep in my mind when I'm writing breaking news is I try to, you know, stick to the facts, just what I know. And sometimes, though, we have to update stories with new information, and we have to say, you know, initially people thought this, but it was actually that. And you got to hope that people are still following your coverage and are checking back on your website to see that updated story. But it can be a challenge. That's actually something that Twitter is good for. If someone is following you, you can give updates and retweet a previous tweet and say, well, actually, now we've gotten new information and we can add some more context to this. Here's a link to the updated story. But it's just a challenge of covering breaking news.
So we're coming up on about 10 minutes left, and we wanted to open up to the audience for some Q&A. Again, if you're viewing us via the webcast, please email your question to Michael Hughes. He will get it to me, and we'll get it answered here. So anybody here in the boardroom with us have a question for our panel? Step right on over to the microphone and ask away.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm an investigator in the rail pipeline hazmat. I just had a question. You mentioned earlier about looking at our public docket. What kind of documents are you looking? Are you just looking for photos, or are the reporters actually interested in our factual reports? Because our final reports sometimes take a few weeks to come out. So I was just curious.
No, we're interested in everything: the witness interviews, the factual reports. I mean, if it's a really big, you know, incident, we'll read it all, right? And that's one of the also challenges too, right? When you open a docket, you can dump like, you know, 50, 60 documents at once on there. But no, anything. And I don't know. I mean, obviously, if you had some information earlier, if you wanted to put initial documents in the docket, I mean, our rule is whatever you can get us as soon as possible is great.
Do you find it easy to navigate?
You know, once the docket's there, I mean, you know, I think it is a little annoying. You have to click every PDF, and there's really no way around it.
Yes, we find it annoying too. But I also had just one more question.
Please.
Do you guys ever report on recommendations when, sometimes when we close acceptable a recommendation, that means a safety change has happened. Are you ever interested in that when
Again, the broadcaster versus the narrowcaster, right? I suspect she would be much more able to report all of that than I can. In my case, if we have another incident involving a 737 engine, I'm making this up, then I may say, well, the NTSB recommended XYZ, right? Or if you come out and formally recommend that MAX pilots go through simulator training, we'll probably make a big deal out of that. Because you would be following, of course, Captain Sully, and the FAA is on the fence about this, so you carry a lot of weight with that. But in terms of just closing an item, that probably is not going to make national news for NBC or my competitors, but it may make political, I don't know.
I guess it depends on what the recommendation is and how long it took the agency, if it's an agency, to close it. And we do care about it because oftentimes when the FAA, for example, goes in front of Congress, a lawmaker will bring up, hey, you got this recommendation from the NTSB 5 years ago, why isn't it closed? So we do cover those to an extent. I actually don't know. I know they're on the website, but is there a way to sign up for an alert when...
Funny you should mention that. So one of the things that we've done at NTSB, in concurrence with a new look at the way we communicate about the most wanted list, we kind of took a lesson from our 50th anniversary where we said we wanted to be thought of as lifesavers and say, well, how do we do that? Well, we do that when these recommendations we make are implemented. That's what changes transportation safety. So this year we're trying to emphasize when those significant recommendations are closed. So we put out a news release and a tweet 1 or 2 months ago, and I'm drafting one right now for several recs that just closed within the last couple of weeks, trying to bring more attention to the progress on recommendations. And some of them are going to be very recognizable, and some of them will be a little more obscure. But as an agency, we want to do a better job of communicating about the results of those recommendations.
We would also be interested in recommendations that have been open for a very long period of time. And I guess if there is a way to prioritize those, like positive train control, I imagine that recommendation is not closed. And it's been how many years? So something like that, though. Obviously, we know about positive train control, but other issues maybe that we're not aware of, where there's been a recommendation out there for a long time and it still hasn't been closed. That's something we'd be interested in reporting about.
I have in mind the media then when PTC is fully implemented and it's going to be at a train track in an engine with someone flipping the last switch that fully implements PTC. I expect all of you to be there. Do we have anything from the folks on online, Michael? No, you still have time. Get your question in. We got a couple minutes. Sir?
Yeah, just a quick question.
You are?
Eric Weiss from Media Relations. Early on in a major accident investigation, while we're traveling on the scene, there are former executives and former board people who you guys comment for and comment, ask for comment, and are oftentimes the face of the agency or the accident for the first hour or so. Could you talk about how you deal with former officials, former NTSB officials in those first couple of hours?
Well, I think you're really talking about as it relates to cable news, probably, right? That's where they're going to show up quickly. So we are very mindful that that various people who've worked at various agencies have various levels of expertise and respect within the organizations. And so just having former FAA or former NTSB after your name is not necessarily going to get you on television, at least not at my shop. I mean, we're very aware of whether that person is well respected or whether they're a flamethrower. And we all know that there are flamethrowers on cable TV on various issues related to aviation safety and that kind of thing. And so I'm very, my producer, Jay Blackman, and I are very aware of that, and we try very hard to make sure that the people who are in NBC and MSNBC and CNBC are not not flamethrowers, that they do in fact have a level of expertise. Now, at NBC News, we have hired people, former FAA and NTSB people who are contributors. Greg Feith, for example, we also have Jeff Gazzetti, and we have John Cox. So I trust the three of them implicitly. I think that they are all very good and very solid, and they keep me from getting into trouble. I mean, we have multiple conversations regularly, and they'll say, you might want to steer clear of that. Or they may say, I'm hearing that this is something that, maybe something that percolates. So those are my three mainstays. They're not the only ones who will be on the air, but those three I trust very, very much in terms of giving me the straight scoop. And hopefully, listen, I tell everybody I'm not a pilot, so don't let me make a silly mistake. And they're very good at keeping me honest, I think.
I would say I more often talk to former board members about issues or about past accidents from years ago, and they were there at the time and can remember some of the investigation. Not so much in the immediate aftermath of an accident.
Any other questions? No? Making your way down? Great.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a pipeline investigator in the same group as Rachel. I just was wondering if you had any advice to give to new investigators who are doing some of their first press briefings. I really appreciate it.
Don't let us intimidate you. Just do your thing. Ignore us. I think the board members are pretty good at trying to insulate the investigators from the media, the hordes of media and the cameras. It's all very intimidating. But the truth of the matter is, most members of the media have no clue what you're doing. So, you could pull out a tiny washer and, you could act like it's some major break in the investigation. We wouldn't know the difference. So just focus on your thing, ignore us, and, hopefully let the public relations guys deal with us.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say, next time we offer our media relations training for investigators, you want to come see us.
I was just going to say, keep it as simple as possible, right? You get a lot of local news folks who don't have a lot of expertise in covering accidents, and avoid as much jargon as possible. Keep it as simple, and don't be intimidated.
Yeah, I would say, we always advise this to folks when we're trying to get them ready for briefings. You can always talk process. When you don't have a lot of information about your accidents in the very early stages, you're there on scene, you're still gathering your bearings, and even if you're in day 2 or 3 or 4, and you still don't have a lot of information you can share, you can talk about the investigative process, because there's that saying that all news is local, right? So these folks might have long departed, and you're still going to have that throng of local reporters, because this is a really big deal in Ottumwa, Iowa, and Mom and Pa Kettle want to know about it. Right, so you're going to have to explain to them things that you might not have to explain to these folks because they cover us all the time. But you go back to the investigative process and people will be like, oh, thank you. You just manage that part of the equation for them.
And you will get stupid questions from us. So, you know what?
So don't laugh
We're
at
not
them.
investigators, we're not pilots. We'll ask really silly questions. And just tolerate us if you could, and try to give us the straight scoop. And yeah.
Okay, one more question?
I'm from RPH also, like 2 other questions. I'm an ancient investigator, and you just answered my question pretty much. I was gonna, I've got a lot of stupid questions previously also, particularly with the, which hasn't happened in years, of course, the multi-residential and the commercial building explosions. People seem to always want to know why we're there when a building explodes.
No, when in doubt, you can always answer a different question. If you don't like the question you get asked, right? Just ask the chairman, right?
We are winding down. Maybe if you guys can just take this question quickly. This is from Mike Bauer. He's listening online. Mike is an aerospace engineer with our aviation safety division. He says, he asks, how many people work behind the scenes when you cover a story? So briefly.
So in our newsroom, well, first, it depends on the kind of accident that takes place. If it's surface transportation, then my colleague covers it. If it's aviation, I cover it. And usually it is me and the editor directly above me. And sometimes if it's something that we'll publish on Politico's main website, and so going out from behind the paywall, we'll get other editors involved too, because we write differently at Politico Pro versus the Politico main website. Politico Pro, we won't write out National Transportation Safety Board. We'll just say NTSB. We know our readers know what it is. But if it's in front of, if it's on the main website, we will, I don't want to say dumb it down, but we will write more generally, more broadly for a wider audience. So usually other editors will get involved and can kind of be a check on us, and we'll say, what is this acronym? Or can you explain this a little bit more? Can you not put notice of proposed rulemaking in the sentence? So there are always at least 2 to 3 people involved from the beginning. And depending on where the story goes from there, more people can get involved.
So if it's a small incident, chances are it's just me calling the NTSB, calling local authorities, calling the FAA. If it's a big incident like the Boeing 737 MAX crash in Ethiopia, we had reporters in Kenya, Ethiopia. We had our aviation reporters in Singapore, in Europe, the reporters who cover Boeing. I mean, one of the great things about an international news organization like Reuters is we have 2,500 journalists. Like, if it's a really important thing, we have people all over the world, photographers, reporters, editors, who will be on the ground, very, very quickly. And but ultimately what happens is invariably as time goes on, most of the people move on to other things, and it's me and just a couple other people who follow this story as it goes on and on. So that's, if it's a big story, there are way, way more people, editors behind the scenes, just the one person you see.
Yeah, same thing at NBC News. In the case of the Ethiopian crash, we have people on the ground in Ethiopia, we have people on the ground in Kenya. I'm the primary aviation correspondent, so I'm going to front a lot of this here in Washington. If it's a domestic crash, if it had happened, San Francisco, Asiana, I was in San Francisco, but then beyond me, and I'm the guy who has to write it and put it on TV, I've got producers, I've got editors, I've got camera teams, I've got sound technicians. That's just where I am. If they're also in Kenya, if they're also in Ethiopia, if they're in Seattle, wherever the case is, we can have dozens of people in the editorial process, including legal and standards and executive producers, and all of them trying to make sure that we are adhering to the protocols of NBC News. So it can be a pretty large group of people. But ultimately, if you write the words, and that's my job, that's all of our jobs. If you write the words, you're responsible for the content. Yeah.
Well, I think that is all the time that we have for today. I want to thank everybody who watched us via the webcast and who came here to the boardroom today. I particularly want to thank Brianna, Tom, and David for sharing their time and opinions with us. Really insightful. And please join us in conference rooms A and B for lunch, and we'll keep the discussion going.